Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sang Uno. I'm a Press Secretary of the Korean Embassy here in Kazakhstan. I will be hosting today's event. Today's webinar is joined by many people across Kazakhstan. There are ambassadors, public officials, and scholars, as well as students joining us today. Before we start, please make sure, once again, your microphone is on mute during the course of the webinar. If you have not checked your sound yet, this is the right time to do that. First, let me introduce His Excellency Mr. Koo Hong-seok, Ambassador of the Republic of Korea to the Republic of Kazakhstan, for his opening remarks. Please welcome Ambassador Koo Hong-seok.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for participating in today's seminar. Today, we have invited three renowned security experts from Korea, Dr. Kim Jin-na, Dr. Bong Yong-sik, and Dr. Jung Myung-guk. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to the speakers for their contribution. I also would like to express my special gratitude to Deputy Foreign Minister Ashbayev for his participation. Please allow me to briefly touch upon the development on the security environment on the Korean Peninsula since the Moon Jae-in government inauguration in 2017. As many of you may remember, back in 2017, North Korea's provocations were further escalated. In response, the United States was also pursuing a maximum pressure campaign on North Korea. At the time, tensions on the Korean Peninsula heightened to the point of real fear that another war may break out. In the midst of escalated tension in the Korean Peninsula, President Moon Jae-in issued his vision of peace in Berlin. While he made clear that North Korea should stop its nuclear provocations, he proposed a peace regime that would fundamentally transform the hostile relationship between the two Koreas. The proposed peace regime relied on economic cooperation and regular non-political exchanges between the two Koreas, which would build trust. With greater trust, the two Koreas would engage in a step-by-step, comprehensive approach toward the denuclearization of North Korea. In the beginning of 2018, the Moon Jae-in government was given a great opportunity towards the realization of this vision. In his New Year's address, Chairman Kim Jong-un of North Korea announced that he will send a delegation to participate in the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. Soon thereafter, high-level talks between South and North Korea officials took place along the sidelines at the Olympics. 3 inter-Korean summits and 2 United States-North Korea summits followed. The historic summits proved that peace can progress through dialogue. In recent days, it seems that the progress on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the reconciliation of inter-Korea relations have stalled. Despite the recent impasse, however, the ROK government is committed to pursuing dialogue with a firm belief that we can achieve denuclearization and establish everlasting peace on the Korean Peninsula through continued engagement with North Korea. Today's seminar is all the more timely as the international community is currently undergoing fundamental transformation due to the unprecedented pandemic and the inauguration of new U.S. administration. I am certain that today's seminar will give us insight into the path towards the denuclearization of North Korea and also enhance our understanding on the current security environment of the Korean Peninsula. Thank you very much.
From the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, Deputy Foreign Minister Yerujan Ashikbayev is joining us today to congratulate our event. Please welcome Deputy Minister Ashikbayev.
Well, this time around, everything should work fine. Your Excellency Ambassador Koo Hong-so, Excellencies, distinguished participants. First and foremost, my apologies for those technical issues. It's not easy to work from home. Now it's my turn to be away from my office. So, but nevertheless, distinguished participants, I'm pleased to address today's webinar. The security situation on the Korean Peninsula is truly important in the context of ensuring long-term peace and stability in the region and in the entire world. The topic of denuclearization is also very much close to the hearts and minds of every citizen of Kazakhstan. I would say it's enshrined in our DNA. Next August, we shall celebrate the 30th anniversary of the history of our first president, Nur-Sultan to close down the nuclear test site in Semipalatinsk. The unprecedented decision the way nuclear weapon-free future into a prosperous country, a responsible and reliable member of the international community. After 30 years, we are convinced of that fast by our core renewed by centenary nations. Our permanent membership in the UN Security Council in 2018, Kazakhstan instantly advocated a peaceful, political, diplomatic settlement of the situation in the Korean Peninsula. During the Kazakh presidency of the Council in January 2018, we organized important consultations, which resulted in an expression of unanimous support of the Council for the inter-Korean negotiations. On January 18, 2018, Kazakhstan also successfully organized a high-level thematic briefing of the Council to discuss wide range of problematic issues of non-proliferation in connection with confidence-building measures, thereby contributing to revitalization of peace process on the Korean Peninsula. We constantly supported and are supportive of the work of the 1718 Committee, while advocating that the sanctions to be extremely constructive, sending a clear and an ambiguous signal to North Korea that the international community does not accept its nuclear program and insists on early denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We're also constantly trying to inspire Pyongyang with our practical example, as our experience is the most relevant. My country had everything it needed to preserve its nuclear potential 30 years ago. We had our own nuclear test site, nuclear arsenal, which at the time was the fourth largest in the world, almost full enrichment cycle, scientific expertise and infrastructure. But we dismantled and destroyed all this successfully and irreversibly. We are ready to continue to share our experience for a nuclear weapon-free world and ready to support and participate in all further initiatives to ensure the bright future for the Korean Peninsula and Korean nation. I wish you all a thought-provoking and practically useful discussion in achieving a common understanding of the issue and clarity on possible further steps and actions. Kazakhstan is convinced that diplomacy remains the only way to ensure long-term peace, security, and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. We stand always ready to provide practical assistance based on our impeccable reputation as well as practical experience in denuclearization. And I thank you for your attention.
Let me go to our next speaker. Actually, it is a video message from the director of the Institute of World Economy and Politics, Mr. Sartibayev. He sent us a video message. Let us listen to his message.
Dear friends, on behalf of the Institute of World Economics and Politics under the Nur-Sultan Foundation, I would like to greet all the participants and speakers of this event. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to deliver a welcoming speech to such a respected audience. The situation on the Korean Peninsula is one of the key problems in the international security system, which has remained in limbo for many, many years. Positive results achieved during the warming of relationship period between Pyongyang, Seoul, and Washington came to a naught by the end of 2019, when the situation on the peninsula entered a period of uncertainty again. Thus, in the top 10 global risks for Eurasia in 2020 rating prepared by our institute in November 2019, the escalation of the conflict on the Korean Peninsula was noted as one of the very possible scenarios. In 2020, the DPRK nuclear program remained largely in a frozen state. However, the risk of an escalation of the conflict is extremely high. In this respect, such events are important from the point of view of finding optimal solutions to the current crisis. Study of the positive and effective experience of other countries that have resolved the nuclear dilemma, avoiding the threat of a nuclear conflict, also plays a special role in that regard. Kazakhstan is rightfully considered one of the leaders of the global nuclear peaceful movement. This status was obtained thanks to a consistent policy based on the Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev initiatives and political decisions in the field of nuclear security, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Our country has created a unique precedent in world history by abandoning the fourth largest nuclear missile potential in the world, as well as closing the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, which was the largest in the world. I believe that Kazakhstan's experience in nuclear disarmament, destruction of nuclear infrastructure, and transformation of its individual elements into peaceful logics is of particular interest to our Korean colleagues. In August 2018, a memorandum of cooperation was signed between the foundation of the first president of Kazakhstan and the Korea Foundation, within the framework of which 2 rounds of expert consultations on the DPRK nuclear issue were held. During the events, we discussed current state of dialogue between Seoul and Pyongyang, the international context of the DPRK nuclear problem, and outlined new promising ways out of the crisis. Despite the fact that coronavirus pandemic has disrupted the course of our planned activities, I'm sure that after the stabilization of situation, we'll continue our dialogue with our Korean partners and colleagues. Today, in addition to current negotiations on the state level, we also need more flexible, informal approaches that will be aimed at promoting a positive agenda on nuclear security issues. In this context, expert interaction can help strengthen trust and create a positive atmosphere for the de-escalation of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Dear friends, in conclusion, I would like to once again thank the organizers of this event for the opportunity to speak to the audience. I wish all the participants of today's event fruitful and interesting discussions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director. Before we get started, let me just briefly explain how we are going to proceed with our discussion. We have 3 speakers, and we will make presentation. They will make presentation, and they will, after the completion of all the presentation, we are going to have a Q&A session. So while you listen, the audience, you listen to the presentation, you can write your question on the chatting box. And the questions on the chatting box will be collected by our staff and will be addressed at the Q&A session after all the presentation are finished. Okay, without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kim Jin-ah. Dr. Kim is currently serving as a research fellow at the Korea Institute for Defense Analysis. She is a member of the Advisory Committee for the Ministry of National Unification and the Blue House Public Information Committee. She holds a PhD in International Relations from Graduate School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Please welcome Dr. Kim Jin-ah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Can I share my slide with you right now?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. All right. Yes, it's truly my honor to be part of this event today. I think it is timely important to discuss one of the most important security issues that we are facing today. Denuclearization of North Korea is not just a bilateral issue, but a regional and global issue, in my opinion. Because denying North Korea's nuclear status is very important from the perspective of upholding the NPT, relaxing, and this position can set a negative precedent for having future breakout crisis. In considering issues such as North Korea's regime stability, nuclear command and control, and potential horizontal proliferation risk, unlike other nuclear weapon states today, we need to pay much attention to the issue of nuclear disarmament of North Korea. So in this regard, I personally think it is timely important to have a fruitful discussion on this issue today. First, where are we now? Since the working level meeting in Stockholm, Sweden, there has been no significant talks on denuclearization with North Korea. So in my opinion, the status quo situation is not truly a status quo. We don't see any test of nuclear weapons or ICBM, but North Korea continues research and development of new types of weapon system, including SRBM and SLBM. So far, the US under President Trump could only change how to negotiate with North Korea, not what to negotiate with the leadership. The US demands of Pyongyang's taking tangible steps on denuclearization first and foremost seems to somehow conflict with North Korea's demands of Washington's taking corresponding measures first. So far, we reached a deadlock. Will this change will this kind of situation change next year? This is the issue that I would like to discuss today. South Korea's goal regarding denuclearization negotiation is to revive the momentum for a dialogue that we have seen in 2018 and 2019. I'll say that's a minimum goal, but an attainable goal if we utilize the window of opportunity. I'll get to that later. Well, South Korea's position on denuclearization is very much clear. In the national security strategy, South Korea set the peaceful resolution of the North Korean nuclear issue as its top priority national security objective. Seoul engaged Pyongyang in dialogue while remaining resolute in implementing UN sanctions. South Koreans understand that the nuclear issue cannot be resolved overnight. So South Korea's position has been so far to keep the dialogue moving forward and play a significant role in encouraging North Korea to take steps toward denuclearization. Well, in fact, history shows that North Korea wanted to exclude South Korea from negotiations with the US as much as possible, saying that the issue of denuclearization is just a bilateral one between Washington and Pyongyang. But such a strategy is expected to be somehow difficult for North Korea to maintain in the future. During the Trump administration, the US policy toward North Korea had two extreme ends. In 2017, it threatened preemptive military strikes against North Korea. And in 2018, it held the first ever summit, which surprised us. The US approach focusing on such a bilateral negotiations has resulted in, unfortunately, weakening South Korea's position in the process of dealing with North Korea problem. However, the incoming US administration will emphasize close consultations with the allies. So it is expected that South Korea will be able to reduce policy uncertainty in dealing with the North Korean nuclear issue as well. Well, I'd like to make 4 points about the next US administration's policy regarding the Korean Peninsula issues, because that is very, very important in South Korea's policy toward North Korea when it comes to establishing peace on the Korean Peninsula and pursuing with the idea of denuclearization of the North. The first is the position on non-proliferation and disarmament negotiations. There is still such an understanding in Washington on the need for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but there is a sense of skepticism, of course, about the feasibility of this idea. However, the issue of North Korea will continue to be very important, considering the fact that President-elect Biden has emphasized US leadership in international regime, including the non-proliferation regime as well. People in the Biden camp stressed disarmament, including North Korea's denuclearization. These policies are also closely linked to the idea of establishing a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula and the building of military confidence that the ROK government has emphasized so far, because these two issues are closely related. There is a possibility that the US will be more active in dealing with the North Korean human rights issues, given that it will further emphasize democratic values than before. The US Congress is currently discussing the use of funds to improve the human rights situation in North Korea, making efforts to condemn North Korea's systematic human rights abuses at the UN level, and implementing sanctions under the Otto-Warmbier Act. Therefore, the North will regard this kind of move as a pressure on its regime, and that will cause certainly a significant challenge to the future denuclearization talks as well. However,
Dr. Kim, sorry to interrupt. Can you try turning your slide forward? The slide is at the first page now, and it's not moving.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I can see my slide changing, but I'm not sure what's
Can you turn
really
it
happening.
inward? Okay.
You see?
Yeah, it's
see?
moving now. Yeah, good.
Sorry. Let me. No, now I cannot. Yes, right now. Okay. Let me continue. So the incoming administration is likely to pursue reaching an agreement with North Korea after sufficient working level consultations on the issue of denuclearization with allies and friends. We cannot rule out the possibility that the US may attempt to reach a phased implementation agreement in a way very similar to the one that it had pursued with permanent members of the Security Council, Germany, and the EU in dealing with the Iran nuclear issues in the past. Here again, South Korea could play an important role in proposing and coordinating an agreement acceptable to both the US and North Korea, as it did in the past six-party talks. The US is expected to maintain considerable pressure on China, and under these circumstances, the possibility of seeking strategic solidarity between North Korea and China may increase. In the rivalry between the US and China, North Korea will attempt a strategy to increase its strategic value. And China, which has to focus on responding to Washington's tough policy on Hong Kong and Taiwan issues, is likely to prefer stability in North Korea. Then North Korea will be able to think that time is on its side and spend more time on increasing deterrence against the US and South Korea so that it can lead denuclearization talks to its advantage. So what we are seeing is both challenges and opportunities for denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. It is likely that the US will put more pressure on North Korea. The international community's attention includes nuclear non-proliferation, responding to cyber threats, and blocking other illegal activities and so forth. So sanctions are imposed on North Korea, not just because of nuclear proliferation issues, but because of other issues as well. So we need to pay attention to the fact that sanctions against North Korea become more important. It means to keep the North in the negotiation table. So it is highly likely that the US will actively use secondary boycott, targeting countries that violate sanctions against North Korea, especially China. The Biden camp believes that North Korea is a strategic burden to China as well. Why? The logic is that China will understand eventually that its lack of cooperation on North Korea's denuclearization does not serve its best interest, in a sense that it will eventually strengthen coordinated pressure from the US and its allies in this region. The second possible scenario is, I will say, pragmatic diplomacy. The US policy toward North Korea is called so-called principle of diplomacy. What this means is more firm but proactive diplomacy with North Korea. What the media call strategic patience will not be a concept that explains the policies of the next administration in the US, because principled policy is a term that the US has often used to describe the way it negotiated with Iran in the past. US created a framework for sustainable implementation of the agreement based on a strong verification mechanism. By applying a mechanism to Iran that allows inspection and verification whenever and wherever possible, the US has enhanced the transparency of Iran's nuclear activities. And in return, the US agreed to a conditional easing of sanctions and peaceful nuclear activities in Iran. So when it comes to North Korea, the US is also likely to try this kind of approach. And it is expected that South Korea and the US will consider the merits of step-by-step solution together. It is also believed that if the diplomatic dialogue channel with North Korea is not open, it will increase the risk of North Korea misjudging the situation. For example, Mr. Jake Sullivan, who led the Iranian nuclear talks during the Obama administration, stressed that the deal with Iran was not perfect, but diplomatically achievable. So similarly, there is a possibility of taking a pragmatic approach in the negotiations with North Korea. Third, deterrence. The first thing that Mr. Antony Blinken, who is nominated as Secretary of State, has emphasized regarding North Korea policy is deterrence. Many from the Democratic Party worried so far about the alliance or being held hostage in the North Korean nuclear negotiations, especially after President Trump made a unilateral decision to stop large-scale joint military exercises with South Korea. So the US will strengthen its security commitment to the alliance, which is highly likely to happen. And these efforts will come in many forms. It can include strengthening the joint military posture and revitalizing joint exercises and strengthening and enhancing the level of cooperation when it comes to missile defense against threats from North Korea. So discussions on the transfer of wartime operational control to South Korea will also continue. An essential change in such a policy, such a process, is the strengthening of the South Korean military capabilities. So in the end, these efforts are focused on deterring North Korean provocations and ensuring readiness to possible emergency situations. If all that happen, what will North Korea do? Well, response from North Korea is very much crucial. There can be, three different pathways, in my opinion, but all depends on North Korea's intention, domestic conditions, and the utility calculation that the leadership in Pyongyang may have. If North Korea has serious domestic problems to tackle, then it will become risk averse and just to keep signaling enough to maintain attention from the international community. That's one of the options. If North Korea becomes more or less opportunistic, then it will choose a strategy of turning the screw little by little while observing reactions from others to some form of low-level provocations. If North Korea is risk acceptant and pursues changing the status quo by showing assertiveness, then what we will see is very much a high-level provocation. However, in my opinion, given the internal situation in North Korea, it is not in a situation to attempt such an excessive military provocations. North Korea should recover from economic and social damages, especially caused by the COVID-19. And it has to prepare for the 8th Party Congress in January next year. And the leadership in Pyongyang, which must present a new blueprint for economic development in North Korea, may possibly prefer a stable environment for the time being. So a provocation is attempted in the expectation of a high political gain at a low cost. That's the definition of provocation. If North Korea resumes nuclear weapons testing or ICBM testing, it will blow up even the opportunity for the new US government to consider practical alternative options. So in the long run, excessive reliance on China also puts pressure on North Korea. Therefore, North Korea's motivation to find a diplomatic exit could increase. Under these kind of circumstances, a passively observing the situation, that option would not be reasonable for North Korea as well. An alternative option that North Korea may seek can be to use South Korea strategically to resume dialogue with the US as soon as possible. However, North Korea would be in a situation where it has to seek ways to make up for its nuclear deterrence to be lost in the course of denuclearization. And therefore, continuous efforts will be made to develop new weapons with some kind of asymmetric capabilities vis-a-vis the ROG military. So we should not rule out that kind of possibility as well. Currently, the moratorium does not include research and development of weapon system. If North Korea conducts a short-range or a medium-range missile test, it may be caused by not only political calculation, but also technical reasons as well. So this situation does not help to create peaceful conditions necessary for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the establishment of a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So in my opinion, in cooperation with the international community, the South Korean government should continue to send signals to North Korea that preparations for the negotiations, which is a diplomatic approach to North Korea, are continuing. So I think it is good for crisis prevention as well. I'll stop here and I look for more comments and feedback from you. Thank you very much.
We'll continue with our presentation. Our second speaker, we're going to invite Dr. Bong Young-sik. Dr. Bong is currently serving as a research fellow at Yonsei University Institute for North Korean Studies. He served as the director of Foreign Policy and National Security Program and senior research fellow at the Asan Institute from 2011 to 2016. Dr. Bong has been interviewed and quoted widely in the broadcast media, including Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and Financial Times. Dr. Bong holds an MA and PhD in political science from the University of Pennsylvania. Please welcome Dr. Bong Young-sik.
And the second point is that I'm wearing a suit and tie all the way from top to bottom because I've been doing my lectures only through virtual connections with my students because of COVID-19 outbreak in Korea. Sometimes students joke at me whether I'm only wearing suits and tie shirts up here, but wearing running pants beneath the desk. But I'm fully dressed to show respect to the organizer of this great event. I especially send my gratitude to Ambassador Koo Hong-seok and Deputy Minister Shivayev and Director Yezan for this great opportunity. Third point I'd like to begin with is that since Dr. Kim Ji-ah has a thorough review of strategic and military dimension of North Korea and the security conditions of the Korean Peninsula, I'd like to focus on something else, which is the inter-Korean cooperation and the prospects for and the public opinion for the unification of the two Koreas and the reverberation, aftershock of the Hanoi no deal between US President Donald Trump and the Chairman Kim Jong-un in 2019 in the context of current economic situations inside North Korea. Okay, please flip the slide to the next one. Thank you. This is a summary points of my take on the prospects for unification of the two Koreas based upon 2014 public opinion surveys conducted at the by the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, which I was involved in. These are the key findings we had. That although Koreans are very famous for their preoccupation with this ethnic homogeneity, the economic reasoning has been gradually and significantly replaced by economic reasoning when Korean public is thinking of the issue of the reunification. And second point is that North Korea holds a very negative images since early 2010s, which would be a big obstacle for progress of inter-Korean cooperation. And the third finding we had was the South Koreans think the unification not so much as an opportunity, but as a burden. This is especially acute among young South Koreans who are really concerned about their own financial conditions. And the COVID-19 outbreak does not help the situation in 2020. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is the main reasons for reunification based upon the diverse responses from the our survey correspondents. And you can see that still the shared ethnicity accounts for 33%, or over 1/3 of the entire responses. So I do not deny that the ethnic reasoning is still very influential, but compared to the past, the ethnic reasoning is not the most predominant reason for why two Koreas have to be reunited. Other reasons like more pragmatic reasons, such as acceleration of economic growth, unified Korea exercising international influence, or South Korea and North Korea, possibly decreasing, defense spendings and resolving separate family issues are also on the rise. So if you combine, next slide, please. If you combine the reasons for ethnic nationalism and reasons for economic or material gains as a reason for making progress toward the reunification of two Koreas, you could see that the ethnic reasoning is most pronounced among so-called Korean War generations, Koreans in their 60s or even older. But younger South Koreans are more pragmatically oriented toward the issue of reunification with North Korea. Next slide, please. And you can see that the importance of ethnicity in unification has been on steady decline. You could see that it accounts for 33%, which is quite low compared to 50.6% in 2007. Next slide. And as I said, the increasingly negative image of North Korea is a big obstacle for South Korean government trying to persuade the public to render support for inter-Korean economic cooperation and dialogue with the ultimate goal of reunification in mind. As you can see, the most pronounced images of North Korea would include war, military nuclear weapons, 37.5%, the blue, or dictatorship, 19.4%, colored in purple, human rights problems in light blue, 7.2%, and you cannot see any good image, positive image of North Korea in our 2014 public opinion survey. Next slide. And North Korea is persistently at the bottom in terms of country favorability. Next slide. And it is about the personal affinity, whether you feel personally connected or positive toward a specific people in a specific country. 0, not close at all, and 10, very close. And the average score of North Koreans is at 4.5%, which is quite low. Okay, next slide. This is my favorite experiment. Because the assumption here is that soccer game is the very good barometer to measure your stay with the previous one. Thank you. The diagram yes, is the best measurement to gauge the country favorability. And this is the comparison between the results in the survey with the same questionnaires in December 1990 and the same questionnaires in April 2013. So there's a significant time lag. And the results are extremely different. In 1990 survey, with a question, if there's a soccer game between two countries, virtual, hypothetical soccer game, which national team, which country would you cheer for? And in 1990 surveys, the ethnic nationalism was so strongly expressed. For instance, in a game between, say, American team and the North Korean team in the virtual soccer match, in 1990, 83.2% of South Korean soccer fans would be cheering for North Korean team. Only 15.5% of South Korean would be rooting for the American soccer team. But if you see the result in April 2013, the proportion is reversed. 57.7% of South Koreans will be cheering for not North Korean team, but American team. And only 38.1% of South Koreans will be cheering for North Korean soccer team. So ethnic nationalism has been really on decline. And if you see the upper left corner in the hypothetical soccer match between United States and Japan, you could see that absolute majority of South Koreans will be cheering for American soccer team over Japanese soccer team, which shows a negative sentiment among South Korean public toward Japan. Very persistent and consistent. All right. Next slide, please. What about the pace of reunification? As likewise, it shows a very conservative attitude toward the pace of unification. The absolute majority would say, well, it depends on circumstances. 70.6% in 2014, which was a very high increase compared to the 47.0% in 2010. Next slide. And as I said, that especially post-Korean War generation, younger generation in South Korean society are very concerned about the cost of the unification. In response to the question, how do you expect your financial conditions will be affected in case of unification? 3 out of every 4 young South Koreans responded that they are very concerned that their financial situation will be exacerbated. I'm not saying that the inter-Korean cooperation and dialogue or pursuit of the projects toward the unification are impossible. What I'm saying is that there are significant obstacles that need to be overcome. So next question, next slide, please. How likely is it for North Korea to be the next economic powerhouse? Because the economic compatibility should be clearly demonstrated by the South Korean government in order to persuade the general public in South Korean society. And I don't think there's a positive, next slide please, prospects for North Korea to be next to Vietnam or China. Well, you know Mr. Jim Rogers, the legendary stock investor who joined hands with Mr. George Soros in Quantum Fund. And this billionaire touted that he would invest all he has, all his assets to the future of North Korea becoming next China. But I have not heard that he has actually put his money in North Korean economy. And as you can see in the satellite photo at the left corner, that North Korea still remains like a black hole. You can see the contour of China and the bright lights, the major cities in east coast of China and Japan and South Korea, Seoul. Right? But North Korea is lost in this satellite photo, meaning that North Korea's economic development will be still very distant, uncertain scenario. Next slide, please. Moon Jae-in government launched a very ambitious so-called H, inter-Korean developmental projects and cooperation to rewrite the economic map on the Korean Peninsula, H. Next slide. But it has been very regrettable that North Korea has not aggressively received the initiatives proposed by the Moon Jae-in government since 2019. Next slide, please. Well, the bright spot is the conversion of Wonsan, beach into, tourist site. Next slide, please. Previously, Wonsan beach looked like this, the site for the annual military exercises. Next slide, please. So if you juxtapose these two photos, then you can see there's a hope. But, development of the North Korean economy is still very much subject to what North Korean leadership is going to do with regard to its nuclear and missile programs. So I'd like to conclude my remark by highlighting this point. Just like the case of Uzbekistan, will and strategic decision, big decision made by the top leadership is indispensable for inter-Korean cooperation, because North Korean leadership has to hold hands with the Moon Jae-in government of South Korea, who proposed very generous and bright projects of the inter-Korean dialogue and economic cooperation with North Korea. It is up to North Korean leadership to receive the initiatives proposed by the Moon Jae-in government of South Korea, and it should be Kim Jong-un regime's strategic decision to do something about denuclearization of North Korea in order to bring back United States on the negotiation table, since now we have a new leadership in Washington in Biden administration. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bong. Up next, today's last speaker, Dr. Chun Myung-guk at the Korean Institute for Defense Analysis, who is also an active duty ROK Army colonel, will make a presentation on the topic of Kazakhstan's denuclearization experience. Dr. Chun's military careers cover WMD-related policy planning and implementation for the Ministry of National Defense and providing nuclear-related technical assistance and expertise for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Chan's academic backgrounds are mainly in science and engineering, BS in physics, MS and PhD in nuclear engineering. Dr. Chan, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? My voice is okay? Okay, let me start. It's my great honor to participate in this web seminar. And I would like to appreciate the Korean Embassy in Nur-Sultan for inviting me and hosting this web seminar. For today's web seminar, I studied on the denuclearization history of Kazakhstan, especially focused on what Kazakhstan accomplished, what's the reason for those accomplishments, what can we Koreans learn from Kazakhstan. Now I'm going to start my presentation by introducing some key accomplishments that Kazakhstan achieved through denuclearization history. First accomplishment is that all Soviet Union nuclear forces stationed in Kazakhstan withdrew to Russia, and its related nuclear facilities were completely decommissioned or dismantled. Nuclear forces moved out of Kazakhstan include strategic rocket forces and strategic air force. Two Soviet Union strategic rocket divisions with 104 SS-18 ICBM moved out to Russia, and all remaining ICBM silos were destroyed and sites were restored eco-friendly. One Soviet Union Air Force stationed at Chagan base operating 40 strategic bombers and 320 nuclear cruise missiles were all withdrawn to Russia. And 7 abandoned bombers in the base were completely taken apart. Nuclear facilities dismantled include liquid fuel storage facility of SS-18 missile bases, nuclear weapons storage in Kazakhstan. These were completely dismantled and contaminated areas were cleaned. Semipalatinsk nuclear test site, that a total of 456 times nuclear tests had been conducted for last 40 years since 1949, was completely sealed after conducting extensive environmental contamination survey. Other than nuclear weapons and facilities, the production facilities of biological and chemical weapons operated by the Soviet Union were also safely dismantled or transformed for peaceful purpose. Second one is that a significant amount of weapon-grade nuclear material remained in Kazakhstan, was safely and securely transferred to overseas. Approximately 600 kilograms of weapon-grade highly enriched uranium that had been stored in a Kazakhstan's industrial company was packed and transported securely to the United States through so-called Sapphire project. Then the transferred weapon-grade material was diluted to low-enriched material and refabricated into the fuel for commercial nuclear power plant in the US. Third one is that most of the nuclear or WMD-related facilities in Kazakhstan were decommissioned or redirected for commercial use. These facilities include military-purpose nuclear reactor, nuclear fabrication facilities, missile production factories, research institute of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons. Fourth accomplishment is that most scientists and engineers worked in nuclear and WMD-related R&D institute in Kazakhstan were successfully redirected to peaceful areas. One significant example is Kazakhstan's National Nuclear Center. In summary, Kazakhstan could accomplish its security and economic development goal and contributed to world peace through the successful denuclearization policy and by leading the establishment of Central Asia nuclear free zone. Next, I'd like to point out what are the main reasons of Kazakhstan's successful denuclearization. First one, I want to highlight on Kazakhstan's leadership, especially President Nazarbayev. I think Kazakhstan was able to achieve rapid denuclearization by the insight and right policy decision of Kazakhstan's leadership, especially by selecting a road to national economic prosperity instead of a nuclear weapon. Former President Nazarbayev and his staff could catch both economic growth and the rise of national status in the international community. Ratifying START and NPT, participating in IAEA and NSG, signing CTBT, along with taking denuclearization action, Kazakhstan could become a role model for denuclearization and could gain credibility and prestige from international community. Next region could be an international security environment surrounding Kazakhstan. In the post-Cold War, while the risk of war between superpowers reduced, but the risk of nuclear and WMD proliferation was increasing. The efforts of international community in strengthening non-proliferation regime had provided a friendly environment for Kazakhstan's decision on denuclearization. When Kazakhstan was established in 1991, it didn't have its own forces, and its borders with neighboring countries were unclear, so national security was not guaranteed and very unstable. Under such a poor security environment, active US foreign policy for enhancing international non-proliferation regime and the security assurance commitment of superpowers had contributed to addressing the security concerns of Kazakhstan. For example, various political and diplomatic measures such as active diplomatic engagement of US political leadership, Russia's security assurance commitment, CIS Collective Security Treaty of Tashkent, and China's non-intervention commitment helped Kazakhstan make a decision on denuclearization. And as Kazakhstan signed on Lisbon Protocol in 1992 and ratified NPT, US acknowledged Kazakhstan as the legal successor of Soviet Union and granted it the same status as Russia and established US embassy in Kazakhstan. Support by US was also very important for Kazakhstan's decision on denuclearization. Through the CTR program, US had provided budget, technology, and equipment needed for Kazakhstan to take measures for its denuclearization action. Since the conclusion of basic CTR program between Kazakhstan and US in 1994, the CTR program had supported for the dismantle of 148 ICBM silo, the environmental assessment and tunnel sealing of nuclear test sites, dismantle of 7 Soviet Union strategic bombers, and decommission of missile fuel storage and nuclear warhead storage, and the redirection of many scientists and engineers. Kazakhstan government also established the State Commission for the Elimination of Strategic Offensive Armament in order to coordinate and monitor CTR program and denuclearization action. So far, I briefly mentioned about several main reasons for the successful denuclearization of Kazakhstan. Then what should we Koreans learn from our friend Kazakhstan for the promising future of Korean Peninsula? I think there are countless reasons that we could learn from our friend Kazakhstan. Among them, I want to highlight on 4 things. First, I think the most important factor in the denuclearization of nuclear-armed state would be the vision of the top leader. The successful denuclearization of Kazakhstan was a result that the former President Nazarbayev's vision for Kazakhstan's development and its prosperity, and his policy selection for the realization of his vision had made. He recognized that without Kazakhstan's denuclearization, both its national prosperity and security could not be possible. DPRK did also face a similar situation as Kazakhstan did, but its leadership selected a road to nuclear-armed state instead of its prosperity, and it stepped into an isolation from the world. So international community needs to make an effort to engage DPRK continuously, along with sanctions, in order that DPRK's leadership changes its nuclear policy. In particular, it is important that a country with successful denuclearization experience, such as Kazakhstan, helps persuade DPRK leadership. Confidence building between South and North Korea, US and North Korea, is also very important. As a second lesson, stable security environment surrounding Korean Peninsula is also a key factor for the denuclearization of DPRK. Instrumental measures such as security assurance commitment by superpowers and a collective security treaty had contributed to addressing the security concerns of Kazakhstan. Those helped the Kazakhstan people have confidence for their national security without depending on nuclear weapons. The normalization of US-Kazakhstan diplomatic relations and the establishment of Central Asia nuclear-free zone had also contributed to improving Kazakhstan's security. In order for DPRK to choose a road to denuclearization, security assurance measures by US, China, and Russia are essential. However, current security environment surrounding Korean Peninsula is not that optimistic. So tremendous efforts to improve and ease current security environment are required, along with denuclearization talks. And above all, US-China strategic competition should not be further aggravated and needs to be managed stably. Talks on Northeast Asia nuclear-free zone could be useful for the improvement of regional security environment, and the Central Asia model for nuclear-free zone, which was established by leading role of Kazakhstan, could be benchmarked. As a third region, support from international community led by South Korea and US is also essential to the denuclearization of DPRK. International community needs to assure DPRK that if it makes strategic decision on denuclearization, then political, diplomatic, and economic support would be provided. Finally, I want to say that I believe that Kazakhstan's experience and know-how in denuclearization would be very good reference for the DPRK denuclearization and need to be transferred to DPRK. Kazakhstan's lessons from the implementation of CTR program could be good guidance to any future CTR program for DPRK. Environmental restoration of widely contaminated area, such as a nuclear test site and a redirection program for many scientists and engineers who worked on WMD-related projects, are very challengeable tasks. Kazakhstan's experience and know-how could be excellent reference for North and South Korea. All my presentation ends here. Thank you for your all attention.
Thank you very much, Colonel Chan. Now, like I said, we're going to have a Q&A session. Some questions have been collected by the staff in the embassy. So Mr. Dulat is helping me with the questions. Mr. Dulat, can you share the question? I think the questions are mainly here today, two things. One is about U.S. new administration's policy on North Korea. What will there be, and what will be the changes compared to the previous administration? I think Dr. Kim already touched upon the issue in her presentation, but it seems that the audience is very much interested in listening more about the differences, new approaches of the new Biden administration. So, Dula, can you go to the previous one? So the question, do you think Joe Biden's administration will shift in policy and focus? The very general question, what to negotiate with North Korea? And another question is, do you think the six-party talks should resume? Next slide. So what do you think about the probability that Biden administration prefers multilateral approach to the nuclear negotiation vis-a-vis DPRK over bilateral approaches? Also, the question related to six-party talks, I guess. So, Dr. Kim, can you respond to those questions?
Sure, I will. Let me just summarize what I already explained to you. First of all, in order to bring North Korea back to the negotiation table, I think Biden administration will focus more on sanctions because pressure is important. It's part of coercive diplomacy, right? And after that, it will focus on more pragmatic approach to North Korea, even considering step-by-step approach, because they are not really satisfied with the current status quo because it does not solve anything. So what they hinted actually was that they can reconsider the merits of the offer made at the Hanoi summit by North Korea. At that time, North Korea mentioned opening up Yeongbyon facility and moving on to the next step gradually. So I think there can be a review of all these different options. And after that, I think they will start working level discussions first, not the high level summit talk. But because thorough preparation is very important in the minds of those who are working for President-elect Biden. So I think working level, step-by-step approach will be the key approach to North Korea. In the past, well, we had six-party talk. At the time, China hosted it. But the crux of this format was a bilateral talk between the US and the DPRK in the past as well. There was a bilateral negotiation within a six-party dialogue. Well, I think we'll probably see a similar approach because the Biden camp mentioned that the next dialogue with the DPRK could be multilateral as well. So the difference will be that there will be a more cooperation between the US and US allies, considering the tense relations between the US and China right now. Well, as I mentioned before, within a multilateral framework, South Korea can play a bigger role in the past and now. Before six-party agreed on the actions for the implementation of the joint statement in February 2007, South Korea proposed basic ideas and met with the US, North Korea, and China to ensure that we are on the same page. And about China's role, well, it is desirable that the US cooperates with China on nuclear issues because Beijing plays a role in pressuring North Korea, but at the same time, it can present options to Pyongyang and somehow relieve North Koreans' concerns about uncertainty of the future dialogue. From South Korea's point of view, the US is always concerned about the possibility of North Korea not complying with agreed implementation plan. If North Korea fails to comply, then it becomes necessary for China and others to join stronger pressure on North Korea. So I think the US will welcome China to be on board. South Korea value close cooperation with China in that regard. Before reaching the February agreement in 2007, South Korea and China played an important role in discussing the timetable for the implementation of the 2005 joint statement and driving the US and North Korea to accept it. There were, well, not only working level talks, but also summit talks between China and South Korea to discuss all these problems. I expect that more discussions will continue as we are expecting to have resumed high-level dialogue with Beijing in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bo, would you like to respond to the same questions? Do you have something? If not, can you unmute?
All right. I'd like to emphasize just one point, that the key members in the Biden administration in charge of national security and foreign policy are the ones who were deeply involved in the production of JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, including the Tony Blinken, who is going to be the Secretary of State, and the John Kerry, Special Envoy on the climate change, and Jake Sullivan, who will be the National Security Advisor in the White House. So I agree with Dr. Kim that if there will be any negotiation taking place between Pyongyang and Washington on North Korea's denuclearization, it will be very different from the top-down approach employed by the Trump administration. This will be a very difficult, type of negotiation for North Koreans, because it will be based upon verification, transparency, and monitoring.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we also have question about reunification of Korea, which is about Dr. Bong's presentation. Okay, here's the questions. It has been observed for several years already that a significant portion of South Korean population expressed unfavorable views on reunification. If we try to trace the beginning of such negative answers in public polls and surveys, what do you think this skepticism began to emerge and constitute a sizable public opinion? What do you think has brought the skepticism? So the second question is also about the reunification of Korea. South Korea is developing quickly for better prosperity. On the other hand, North Korea is not developing. As a result, South Korea do not want to unite with North Korea anymore. Is it a true statement? I think Dr. Bong already addressed some of the questions, but Dr. Bong, would you please respond to these two questions?
Absolutely. I'm very impressed by the quality of questions asked by Yajira and Ko Ho-yeon. I appreciate you asking those questions. By the way, the Wonsan is the birthplace of the Supreme Leader, Mr. Kim Jong-un, which is also a very famous historical tour site for Koreans, very close to Mountain Kumgang, beautiful mountain, as well as a site of the Pyeongchang Winter Olympic Games. So it has been the ambitious plan for the Supreme Leadership of North Korea to develop that as an international hub of tourism, as a platform for early stage of economic development. We have to wait and see how it will go. Why negative views on reunification? Two reasons. One is North Korea's own doing. Like the military provocations, the sinking of battleship of South Korean Navy Cheonan, and the bombardment of White Island, all in the same year of 2012, really increased the negative view, hostile view of North Korea among South Koreans. And there's a growing discrepancy between the two Koreas. South Korea is the only case in modern history as a country that has achieved not just economic development, but also political liberalization almost at the same time. So as a liberal democracy with a due respect for human rights and civic liberty, there's a growing sense of incompatibility between South Korea and North Korea as two very different divergent political systems. And second is South Korea is a pioneering global power. Good example, BTS, Parasite, winning the Oscar. And North Korea is very different from South Korea in terms of participation in global trends. And there's an economic disparity as well. North Korea is only 1/46th in terms of personal GDP of South Korea. So people in South Korea are concerned about the prospective cost of observing North Korean economy. a country, 40% of the national population, according to the United Nations statistics, are severely malnourished. So, in summary, all these combination of seeming observation of incompatibility or divergence between the two Korea propel very negative and skeptical perspective of reunification of two Koreas among South Korean population. What should be done? Well, Moon Jae-in government has been really patient, maintaining the line of communication and try to provide the humanitarian assistance, but it has been North Korean leadership refusing the hand stretched by the Moon Jae-in government of South Korea, and it only focused on some relief of existing sanctions. But it's like a chicken-egg argument. Unless North Korea is going to make verifiable and important steps toward the denuclearization, existing economic sanctions remain in place. As long as economic sanctions will remain in place, North Korea cannot really engage in any systematic and meaningful economic development. Again, it's up to North Korean leadership to make strategic decisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is about Kazakhstan's denuclearization experience. The first question is how Kazakhstan's experience could be useful in the question of Korean Peninsula's denuclearization. I think this is also was part of Colonel Chan's presentation, but I think you can, Colonel Chan, you can also summarize, maybe you can emphasize some of the most important points in your presentation regarding the lessons we can learn from Kazakhstan's denuclearization experience. Also, the second question is about Russia and Kazakhstan's experience. I think you in the presentation you explained Kazakhstan's experience. So if there is anything related to Russia's experience, if there is, please respond to this question, Colonel Chan.
Hello. Yes. Thank you for your question. I think I already mentioned about how South Korean or North Korean can learn from Kazakhstan's experience in denuclearization, especially Kazakhstan had huge amount of nuclear test sites like North Korea, but North Korea nuclear test site a bit small size if we compare to Kazakhstan's. I think Kazakhstan had lots of experience, especially in environmental restoration. I mean, decontamination of those widely contaminated areas. But North and South Korea, we do not have much experience in that area, especially. So I think we can learn, especially in that in that area, from Kazakhstan's experience. And also, Kazakhstan has experience of redirection program about many scientists and engineers. I think North Korea also has the same problem. North Korea has big scale of WMD program, including nuclear program. So there are many scientists and engineers that should be
okay. Since that we have a little technical issues with Colonel Chan. Okay. Okay. I think we covered most of the questions, but we have one more here. What about the agreements between the U.S. and North Korea? Is a policy of denuclearization through peace can establish conditions that could turn Pyongyang from Washington's foe to friend? Dr. Kim, would you respond?
I will. Actually, denuclearization is just a part of many problems between the US and North Korea. But denuclearization can be a starting point of going further toward diplomatic normalization. The US already had the similar agreement in the past. The 2005 joint statement produced by the Six-Party Talk clearly mentioned that improving relations through establishing a peace arrangement on the Korean Peninsula would be discussed between the two sides. And it was expected that the US and North Korea would work on establishing a liaison office back then for keeping consistent communications. Which could have been a very significant step toward diplomatic normalization. We can expect that happen again if things go well. The Singapore summit joint statement also emphasized improving bilateral relations. One can argue also that we already declared an end of war on the Korean Peninsula because the spirit of Panmunjom Declaration that we had between the two Koreas was signifying the end of war and opening a new chapter for inter-Korean relations. That can also affect the whole discussions regarding normalization between the US and the DPRK. The thing is, well, declaring the end of war is very much different from signing a peace treaty. And perhaps North Korea wants a legally binding document to end the armistice, not a political statement. Because North Korea these days emphasize irreversible measures, corresponding measures from the US. So I think it'll take time. Because North Korea should resolve not only proliferation issues, but also other comprehensive issues, including military confidence building, and arms control, human rights issues, and other illegal activities related problems as well. So it'll take time, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more question directed to Colonel Chen, but we have lost Colonel Chen. So, okay, do we have more questions? It seems we covered every question except for the last question to Colonel Chen. So we have about 3 minutes. So is there anything you want to ask speakers, Dr. Bong, Dr. Kim, and to add here today to share with the audience here in Kazakhstan? Maybe if you will, final statement.
So Kim, you should go first.
All right, if then, let me go first. I think Kazakhstan is a good model for North Korea. One of the goals that we want to achieve is including North Korea part of the international community as a responsible member of the society. Kazakhstan entered NPT, CTBT, CWC, and later on BWC after nuclear disarmament. And we hope that North Korea can follow suit after having successful negotiations on denuclearization. And lessons learned from the past activities should be shared with the DPRK. If you have any channel, communication lines, please activate them so that we can have a better future on the Korean Peninsula. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bong.
The experience of and the strategy made by the people and the government in Kazakhstan will be extremely useful for both Korean leaderships in Pyongyang and Seoul to move together for common purposes. So I would like to urge the government of Kazakhstan and any NGO groups in contact with the North Korean authorities too, and South Korean authority as well, to share your wisdom and experience.
Thank you. Ambassador, would you like no? Okay. Thank you everyone. It's time to conclude today's webinar. Certainly today's time was not enough to cover all the related issues, but I hope that we'll be able to host an offline seminar soon with the same speakers here in Kazakhstan after this pandemic becomes fully under control. Okay. Once again, thank you everyone for your participation. And I'm sure today's webinar has contributed enhancing everyone's understanding on the Korean Peninsula security issues. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Thank you.